Hey everyone, welcome to Office Hours with Cloud Posse, where we discuss the latest DevOps news, AWS announcements, and Terraform insights, all sourced from our sweetops community. Plus, a live Q&A you can't find anywhere else. It's November 12th, 2025. I'm your host, Eric Osterman. Real quick, I'm the founder and CEO of Cloud Posse. Cloud Posse sells AWS reference architectures that get your team production ready in just 2 weeks. So if you're curious to learn more about that, just head over to cloudposse.com. So how can you maximize today's session? First off, our format is very informal. You can engage as much as you'd like. You can ask questions. And if you're curious about any of our open source tools like Atmos, this is a great place to ask. And for those on the recording, we do host these calls live, so don't miss out. You can join us by going to cloudposse.com/office hours, where you can enter in your email and get an invitation to join these live Zoom calls. I do have one ask. If you find any portion of today's session valuable, you can share it with your team. Just head over to youtube.com/cloudposse, where you'll find the recording posted in just a few hours. So with that said, let's get into a discussion of the news. First one caught my attention. It was in my inbox this morning. I thought it was kind of interesting, something I'd wanted to do before. So ChatGPT is adding the ability to have group chats with the AI. So you can imagine having a team chat when you're solutioning maybe on how to go about implementing some product, or like a PRD, for example. Does Anthropic have something like this with their solution, or any other providers have the concept of a group AI chat? All right.
Not that I've come across. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm sure you could hack like the equivalent of spaces in each of those. Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought that Copilot had a group group chat mode.
GitHub Copilot?
No, Microsoft.
Okay,
I know the distinction's weird because Microsoft. Hopefully you know what I mean.
They really made that. Yeah, I know what you mean. That was a really confusing branding they chose there. They have Microsoft Copilot and GitHub Copilot, and then AWS Copilot, which has nothing to do with all the above. Not that that's Microsoft's problem. And next, this was something I'd never heard of, Harmonix. So many of you have probably heard of Backstage, which is like an internal developer platform you can deploy. It was started at Spotify, I believe, and donated to the CNCF. It's a standalone project now. It's a great way to create an internal developer platform, totally extensible, pluggable. You can create your own plugins for it. Plus, there's a rich ecosystem of plugins together with it. Now, I thought it was interesting that AWS has created their own kind of distribution of Backstage for AWS for internal developer platforms. Don't know anything much about it. Somebody brought up the question in our Slack community if anybody had experience with it. Curious, has anyone heard of it, or is anybody using this? You're using it, Gary?
We're starting to explore it, and actually in perfect timing as we start to gravitate towards Cloud Posse's Terraform and stuff as well. We are committing into Proton, AWS Proton, and they just end of life or put the sunset on it for a year. So we're looking at transitioning over to Harmonix.
Yeah. Bad timing on that one. Sorry.
So we're very early into looking at it, but we're pretty sold on at least for internal to the team for DevOps at first, and then work on platform engineering, expanding it out if we want more hands on the controls and stuff.
Yeah. I wonder how close is it to like off-the-shelf Backstage? Meaning, if Amazon decides they are not going to continue maintaining this because Amazon has a pretty bad or shoddy open source record, that would be my main concern.
Yeah, I think from what I remember from my team member looking at is like it has the layers on top of it for AWS, but if you had to pull out and go Backstage, like it's not overly coupled to it, or
Okay.
yeah, you wouldn't be so lost like we are with the AWS Proton choice. So
Yeah, for sure. Well, definitely follow up here if you have that up and running, especially if you get that working with Terraform and or Atmos or anything like that. We'd like to know. I am curious about adopting Backstage for a long time, but it just hasn't come up for us as an opportunity to invest in yet. Small little announcement from GitHub Actions. So now you can have 10 nested reusable workflows and call up to 50 workflows from that. And call up to 50 workflows total in a given workflow. So that's 500 workflows, I guess, in total. We ran into issues where we were trying to do this before. I would say mea culpa is that was the problem itself. It wasn't that we couldn't run more workflows this way. It was just that things get too complicated to understand. I would caution anyone going down this path. Okay, you might have good business use cases for it. Everything is very elegant architecturally, and that's what we thought too. But it's so hard to understand. And it's like treating YAML and treating GitHub Actions as a programming language at that point. And I don't know that that's a great way of designing workflows. So we were really bullish on reusable workflows for defining parts of our software delivery process, but we are pulling back from using reusable workflows too heavily, at least in the beginning with customers, until they value, first of all, like the overall architecture of GitHub Actions and the composability of things and being able to use, because you have composable actions, you have composable workflows, that reusable workflows. And it's a lot to take in the beginning if you start using a lot of reusable workflows. So it makes it very hard to understand what's going on. You have to dereference all these files, pointing at other files that might be in other repositories. If you want to make a change, and if your reusable workflows are in multiple repositories, you first need to PR that change into the other reusable workflow. Then you need to update your workflow to point to that branch. Then you need to validate the works. Then you need to merge this thing into the main branch. Then you need to update your workflow to point to that new tag. And then you can finally release that change. Does that sound convenient? Not at all. So at enterprise scale, possibly. If you're using it for very common functionality that doesn't change all the time, or like for compliance reasons to always run some action or some set of steps to verify settings or things like that, I think it totally makes sense. But to think about GitHub Action workflows as composable and building up like a library of functions, and I suggest staying away. Anybody? Any disagreements to that, or any agreements or thoughts on?
Yeah, my team, we were doing that where we had a centralized workflow. And then, I don't know, maybe after like the 100th time of having to go to that central repo, do the PR, do the testing, exactly what you described. It was, we went from the centralized approach to this other approach now where it's like copy and paste the typical workflows. And then once we heavily invested in a Renovate bot, a lot of that maintenance became easier to keep our stuff up to date and add in an auto merge and things like that. So a lot of the reason behind centralizing it was for keeping everything up to date, consistent centrally. And then we learned about Renovate bot and kind of made sense to just go in the other direction of copy and paste and let Renovate bot do its job. So that switch going back to individual repos worked well for us.
Okay, and just reading between the lines, you're saying that one of the reasons that you went for the centralized approach originally was to make it easier to keep the GitHub Actions themselves up to date across all your repositories.
Yeah,
not the
logic itself of how we want to build and tag. We don't have all of that encapsulated in one spot. It's now copied and pasted across many repos. But there are certain projects where we do want to like do overrides. And then when we want to do those overrides, we'd have to go back to the central thing, touch it, and it becomes like a monolith because it's reusable across the repo. So personally, at least, I can't speak for the whole team. I've been liking the copy and paste approach, even though it sounds a little hacky. Just when you factor in Renovate Bot, we're able to stay up to date and maintain it.
So the only counter example here that I've just said that I hate it, but here's a case where we kind of like it. So we do have our centralized .github repository, this one here, which is a GitHub convention. So that's why it looks kind of weird here, .github, because workflows have to be in the .github folder. But what we have is this workflows folder, and this is where we have, by convention, all of these shared workflows. And this is something we've had to do because we have 500 repositories across multiple organizations, etc. So this has been really convenient from that standpoint, but still have the point. I still hate having to make any change. I still hate trying to figure out how anything works, which is why I like if you have kind of a few repositories running GitHub Actions. I like where we've landed with Atmos. So pretty conventional, nothing too radical here. Lots of workflows here, but most of the logic is native to this repository. It does reference some shared workflows. For example, I believe we have a pretty ornate release process, and that is what's it under build here? That calls this shared workflow in our GitHub organization for that. That said, when we want to make changes to that, I don't really love it, the process.
I see you're pointing to main. We were doing that too, and I'm like, I've gone back and forth. Should we use tags on that shared workflows?
Yeah.
Should we use main? Main seems easier, but then when something breaks downstream, and you
find out 6 months later.
Yeah, like unless you're like running the workflows all the time, or in this case, cutting a release all the time, you may not notice it.
Yeah.
So now I'm like leaning towards pin tags. One thing I will say that we are still using the shared workflows for is the generic checks that we want to have across each repo. So there's
exactly
like the required workflows. That's essentially it. We've rolled that out, and that's part of the .github repo. And I found that if you haven't used it much, for anyone on the call that hasn't touched it yet, it's a required workflow that you can enforce in every pull request. I will say there's like probably like 20% of the time it does not run. I don't know why. You have to like close the PR and reopen it. And so some webhook fails on GitHub's end, and the PR just sits there. But it's a really quick close and reopen. But that's been the one caveat with that.
Yeah, I forget where the required workflows were configured for the organization. But
repository roles.
Oh, it's under repository roles.
Rule sets. Maybe repository rule sets. Yeah.
Oh, and you create a rule set with a requirement. Gotcha. Yeah. So my biggest complaint with that, I was so super excited when that first rolled out. Of course, I thought, wow, we don't even need to write a workflow definition in the repositories. We can just centrally manage this. And I thought this was going to be how we manage workflows for all of our Terraform modules across the board, until a pretty big limitation from our standpoint, at least, was, hey, it's only on pull requests, so you can't use it on any other events. Have they changed that?
No, I think it's only pull requests. Yeah.
Yeah. So
like if you go straight to main, you lose the benefits, especially if you're doing like automatic Helm documentation updates. Make them commit to main. Your docs are updated. Get up in a new PR now. So.
Yeah, we wanted it to do like exactly that, like rebuild our READMEs with our README generation that we have. So, all right, well, that's helpful. Oh, I did want to show one other thing though, like that has worked out for us while we're on the topic, and I think keeps things pretty clean. So in Atmos, one of the things I can't stand are really complex workflow files that are hard to look at. So if we look at this is enforcing some of the best practices for your Claude market MD file, as well as your agents. Your agents should be under 25K, and your Claude file needs to be under 40K or Claude barfs, and tells you to make it smaller. So I added 2 small GitHub actions here for this, but rather than like going through the laborious thing of creating a new repo to manage that GitHub action and doing all of that, especially until you validated like this is helpful and we're actually going to do it, just using the .github/actions folder convention. It doesn't have to be here. It could be in any location of your repository for GitHub actions. But I thought this is pretty nice. It keeps it out of the main part of the file system of the repository. Then under here, we put some opinionated small actions. All of these things, they could have just been in the workflow, but then our workflows look gnarly. This has the best of both, where these reusable actions in the repository let us define inline some action, and I saved all of this from being in that workflow. So when you look at the workflow, it's just the parameters that are defined that calls it. Any feedback on this? Also, so there are multiple levels of or multiple types of GitHub actions. This is one of the most convenient ones. It's called a composite action. Composite actions let you take a number of steps, not jobs, only steps, and put them here. And then this is parameterized with these parameters up here. So this is a great way to kind of create reusable functions, if you will, for GitHub, for your GitHub workflows, without needing to make your workflows really messy and without needing to use ugly reusable workflows.
Do you mind going back to where you're calling this check Claude MD size?
Yeah. Yeah, so then we go back to the GitHub workflows, and then the Claude.yaml here, which is just a standard GitHub workflow. And that's just calling this local file system here.
Oh, cool. So you okay, interesting. I didn't realize you could do that. That's awesome. So
you can do it with actions, but you can't do it with workflows, which is a bummer. It would be really awesome if you could dynamically generate a workflow file and then call that in another job, but you can't do that.
So now you end up duplicating all of this, right, per repository. So you end up having Claude MD size, like per repo. You have relatively. Just wondering why not publish it and just version it.
Yeah. This goes back to one of the earlier things I said. I think sometimes one wants to dog food something. One wants to validate, like, yeah, I have a lot of great ideas, right? I don't like to maintain them always. So this is a great way to not be held up by all the rigor that goes into creating a new repository, creating the README for it, creating the release process for it, etc. Adding it to the GitHub marketplace for GitHub actions. Like there's a lot just for like a simple, relatively simple 38-line action, right?
What you're saying makes total sense. I forgot about all the headaches. Every action that we've published to be able to do that, we could also just check it in now from what you just showed. So that's definitely a faster development cycle.
And to be honest, this is still accessible. This under this action, if we wanted to, we can still access this from any other repo. It's just this is kind of where it originated. I'm not saying that is a best practice, but at least that lets you then start leveraging it elsewhere.
But you could, if you do that, even though it's not best practice, you could still reference it as though it's a public action and then just keep it private, right? So that's cool.
Yeah, it'll just keep working like that. So, and these are just some of the ones that we've done. If we have more repos that would benefit from them, we'll probably do exactly what you said, move them to a separate repository that is managed like that. We have, everything starts so simply. Like at Cloud Posse, we have, first of all, a lot of repositories. Wait, this is loading here.
Yeah, I always wonder how many.
Yeah, right now we have archived a bunch to keep this more of like the ones we actively maintain. And I guess I got to click on the repositories. So 251. So that's in this organization. Most of these are Terraform, of course. But we also follow that convention for GitHub actions, prefixing it with the tool or the platform. So then we have another 29 repositories that are just GitHub actions. On top of, well, then we decided to create multiple GitHub organizations. If I could spell here, GitHub actions. So then we're trying to consolidate our GitHub actions in a separate organization, which allows us to manage it separately from our Terraform modules and makes discovery a little bit easier. It also allows us to enforce different organizational permissions, if you will, to the people who maintain it. It allows us to, for example, we also have like a Cloud Posse sandbox organization. And if we go into the sandbox organization, this lets us, give admin to developers in the sandbox organization without them being an admin in our breadwinner organizations, like all the other like main Cloud Posse one. But all of that is to say, we will probably move some of those into public actions once we validated that it works well for us and so forth. What was I going to say related to that? That's that. Next announcements. Briefly saw this. I didn't actually get studied too much. This was on Anton Bavenko's weekly.tf newsletter, a blog post on how you can actually use Athena to query your Terraform state across your S3 buckets. So I thought that was an interesting application of Athena. So you can basically then, get an SQL relational model for your Terraform state. All right. Now to some Atmos promotional material. So we cut a new release this week, Atmos 1.198. This adds some new functionality as well as improving the underlying foundation of the Atmos core itself, and I'll go into that. As a user, this is kind of a cool feature that we've added into Atmos, and I haven't seen done in similar tooling. So trying to figure out where to start. I think we've learned a lot in developing Atmos on what it means to develop a modern CLI, and that there's some things that are just not obvious. What does it mean to have a UI in your CLI? What does it mean to have logging in your CLI? And what does it mean to have errors in your CLI? And I would say most CLIs out there start organically and don't have formal concepts for all of those things. And then it becomes problematic. The more functionality you add, the more developers that are contributing to it that don't understand the difference between UI, logging, and errors. And there are 3 different concepts. And then there's a lot of best practices that go into how do you even write errors with context, and how to even write your log messages, for example, structured logging, to emit enough information in a consistent way. And where do those logs go? That's I/O. Should those logs go to std out or std error? Well, that's a problem too, because if they go to std out and you're piping that into another command, now that's going to corrupt any JSON or YAML or things like that that you're expecting to receive. So that should go to std error. And UI output, like that is essential output to use the CLI. But logging is often confused with output, especially by developers new to a project. So then they're using log messages that can be disabled or silenced for UI output in an interactive application. And that's all messy. So we've been going through a huge refactor within Atmos, making these first-class concepts. And as part of that, we introduced cockroach DB errors, which is a popular Go module for errors in Go, and it adds the ability to generate the Sentry payload. So we integrated Atmos errors with Sentry in this, so you can configure in your own environment a centralized place to get all of your Atmos errors to go to. So if you have Atmos deployed across an enterprise, across lots of repositories and environments, you can then see the common errors bubbling up to the top by configuring a Sentry endpoint in your configuration. So that's why I started talking about like what's the difference between errors, logs, and UI output. So this is related to errors themselves happening in Atmos. And then you have, we might log those errors as output, and then the UI controls where it goes. And here's what that looks like in the Go code to structure. Like one of the things that really bothers me when I use any CLI out there is like when it just says like command failed. Which command? What were you trying to do? Where were you in the code? All of that information is helpful for anybody debugging. So this is allowing us to create structured logs, log messages in Atmos with a builder pattern. Adding hints to the developer that are actionable things the developer can try and do to resolve that problem. And context, which is like other information or metadata associated with that error. All right, next announcement for this is this. So as I mentioned earlier, we are going through this large refactoring effort in Atmos just to make it easier for new contributors to contribute to Atmos without stepping on a bunch of underwater stones and landmines related to log output, UI output, all of those things. So what we've done, and the other thing is like when you're on a TTY, how you display output is different than if you're on a headless terminal. And that gets pretty messy. And then some users want color, some users don't want color, and being able to disable that consistently across everything without having a million conditionals everywhere. So in Atmos, what we've done is we've recreated the whole IO layer, and we've created two formal concepts in Atmos now, a UI channel and a data channel. The data channel is anytime you need pipeable output. The UI channel is anytime you need to present information to the user that should never get redirected, because then you can't use the commands. So those are first class. And as part of that, we introduced the ability to have themes in Atmos. This is petty, but I like pretty CLIs. I like pretty things. So Atmos now is fully themable, and you can specify the theme you want to use. And we also found a JSON data source of lots of popular themes that you've seen in other CLIs, so you can use that now to set up Atmos. Full disclosure, we are rolling this out through the rest of the commands in Atmos. Right now, only new commands will leverage the style sheet, basically, of Atmos itself. And that will be done over the next few months as we continue to modernize parts of Atmos to use the IO layer, the UI layer, etc. Here's another one that I let slip. I thought we supported this already, and then it hit me this week when I was trying to do a demo, and then I realized that related to what somebody else was complaining about in a Slack channel trying to use Atmos. One of the annoying things has been with Atmos that you have to run it from the directory that has the Atmos configuration, or you set some environment variable with where to find that configuration. But look, as a user, you just kind of expect to run a command and it works. Like when you use the git command, you don't think you have to go to the root of your git repository for it to work. It just works. So we finally fixed this behavior in Atmos. If you run Atmos from within a git repository, it will use the git repository's root to help inform where to find the Atmos configuration. So this is about zero config or auto discovery capabilities in Atmos, making it easier to get started using. So now you can run Atmos from any directory within your Git repository, provided that your Atmos YAML is in the root of that repository. It will find where it is. And if you don't want this behavior, or this behavior is causing problems for you, you can disable it with an environment variable. And I guess what I was just gonna do was this briefly. So here's an example, PWD. So I'm inside of a folder inside of our infrastructure repository. Previously, in old versions of Atmos, if I ran Atmos list stacks, that would error. Now that works. It just finds where it is. So little small improvement, quality of life improvement. And that's in Atmos 1.198.
Ja. Nein, ich muss nur aufpassen, dass die Firma nicht das.
Oh, Oscar, I think you are there.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you. Next announcement. Oops. Yeah, so this is kind of cool. One of the big gaps in the AWS Backup story has been your EKS cluster. And I have mixed thoughts about backing up EKS, but I can see the use case as more and more teams use EKS as a platform that is not a disposable one as such. Then you might want to back it up. There's been at least a couple tools. Valero is the one that comes to mind. It's been around for longest. Valero is a way to back up your EKS cluster. Well, now AWS Backup supports Kubernetes cluster backups out of the box, and supports restoration of complete EKS clusters, as well as namespaces within a cluster that it can restore. Don't ask me what this means for your GitOps strategy, your Terraform strategy, and so forth. I have no idea. But if you need to check a box that you're backing up your EKS cluster, well, now you can check the box. Kelsey Hightower, famously once said, "Treat your clusters as cattle," as well, and that's kind of stuck with us. We really encourage teams to treat Kubernetes as fully disposable and keep all the data outside of the cluster, so you can always reconstitute that cluster easily. As soon as you start depending on persistent volumes and data persisting in the cluster, that's totally cool if it's another person's problem managing the cluster. Any thoughts on this? All right, next one. And yeah, last one, honorable mention, if you will. It's going to let me click on it. Did I not make a link here? AWS Control Tower now supports automatic enrollment of accounts. And we are not big proponents of Control Tower at Cloud Posse. I've had a bunch of FOMO around it, but the fact that now years later, you still basically can't manage Control Tower with Terraform, only bits and pieces of it. And account factories for Terraform is appalling to me, and how it's architected and designed. I no longer feel that FOMO, and I feel like managing AWS organizations, accounts, service control policies, configs, security hub, Macie, GuardDuty, etc. with Terraform has gotten better. So the drive isn't there as much. But now I could imagine that you can have a little bit of both. If you have automatic enrollment of accounts and you use Terraform to provision those accounts in an OU, and that OU is configured with Control Tower, now maybe you can meet somewhere in between. The organization gets to manage with ClickOps, Control Tower, and then you get to do your accounts and so forth with Terraform and what resides inside. Any thoughts on this one?
So I know we were going to. Is the future going to be like a new component for that, or like what's the wait to convert over to get this Terraform backed in the future?
Well, I mean, so Control Tower, there is no path really to terraforming things. Okay. But let's say hypothetically, and maybe this is okay. Maybe this is leading up to future announcements at reInvent. There's been some interesting ones. I would have expected AWS Backup announcement to be at reInvent, next month, as well as this maybe. But maybe they're teasing out some things coming. Just reading between the lines or trying to read the tea leaves. Maybe there's going to be better announcement for better like API support of Control Tower, and then this is a good way to adopt all of your accounts that you have already. With that, the other thing is Amazon is pushing very hard through ProServe and through their account managers and solution architects that Control Tower is the way. And it really hurts for us to be contrarian on this point. I don't like it, but it's, yeah, as I said earlier, I just don't like that we can't manage it properly with Terraform. All that said, maybe at reInvent, they're coming out with a way that you can now manage your Control Tower finally through APIs, then vis-a-vis Terraform, you can manage it that way. And then now to get people to adopt it, they made it really easy to adopt your current accounts and do that. But I'm just trying to, projecting what I would like them to announce at reInvent. All right. Excuse my knee sticking out there, slouching here. That is all the announcements I had. Let's see what's going on in the Zoom chat here. I forgot to check it out. All right. Any questions we can get answered today, or any other announcements? Hey, Juan, go for it.
Yeah, can you explain the difference between the Atmos, GitHub Actions, GitOps style, and like the reference architecture speaks about Espresso? Just for context, like the way that we do stuff right now is that we use CodeBuild for building, but it's triggered via GitHub Actions because the engineers wanted to see logs through GitHub Actions, whatever, cool. But that allowed us to basically say we're gonna do a build spec and root. All we're doing is going to be calling that when that's it. So you control the logic inside the build spec for your build because you know your application. We don't. But then on the plus side, if we have security maintenance or something like that, we have one dashboard of CodeBuild, see all of our builds, all for the building part. So kind of just trying to understand the transition if we were to go to GitHub Actions, which I'm okay with because it makes sense. But it's just the visibility part of how do you capture that, but also like what is the difference between those two, Espresso and the GitHub Atmos one?
Oh yeah, so there was a lot there to unpack, but let me see if I can break it down, and then others might have a better input, like on the CodeBuild side, to give an argument there. So so CodeBuild, Code Pipeline, that's Amazon's alternative. That's their CICD solution, right? And they have this concept of a build spec that lives inside of a repository. That's kind of like your GitHub Action workflow for that repo, if you will. CodeBuild, Code Pipeline can use that. That's one thing. Then there's this thing in GitHub Actions where you can use AWS CodeBuild, I believe, as your runner infrastructure for your GitHub Actions. So you can still use GitHub Action syntax and the GitHub Actions UI, and I believe that can run over on AWS there. So that's one way to control things. We predominantly use a different strategy, which is self-hosted runners, and we recommend a service called runs-on.com. We've been using them, really easy to get up and running, and basically scales to zero when you're doing nothing. You can scale up to AWS capacity or your limits as you need it on a dime. And you don't need to deploy Actions Runner Controller, manage Kubernetes clusters, and all of that jazz. So runs on has been pretty cool for that. All right, so that's the landscape. Now I'd like some help trying to understand more, because then you also brought up kind of what we do for ECS at Cloud Posse. And historically, we have relied a lot on Espresso. I should be opening some links here, one second. So runson.com was one. Runson.com is the solution that we really like for self-hosted runners. It's basically deploying a Lambda in your organization, and you go from there. Then the other thing you mentioned was EC Espresso, so Espresso, which is a convenient CLI we've used for many, many years to deploy tasks to Kubernetes clusters, to ECS clusters with a CLI, mostly because Terraform is not ideal when you want to manage task definitions and when you want to do deployments from application repositories. We've been using Espresso, but I have an update on that I want to share, but I'm just trying to establish the lay of the land here. So can you restate your question now that I've kind of framed what all these different pieces are so everyone can follow along? You want to understand?
Yeah, like if you go to atmos.tools and go to GitHub Actions, there's a GitHub, it says GitOps on there. It goes over all these different type of GitHub Actions. Oh,
gotcha. Yeah, our GitHub Actions for Atmos.
And comparing that to reference architecture, it's like, because we primarily are ECS, really, it's just you're updating a short SHA in the YAML file is what we're doing today. Trying to just understand what is the difference between the Espresso and this way in Atmos docs.
Yeah, so let me try. I have to give more context just to kind of make it clear for everyone to follow along, and I just don't also want to introduce more confusion. So everyone who knows Cloud Posse, we're pretty popular for all of our Terraform modules, and the Terraform modules are the ones you find like at github.com/Cloud Posse. We have hundreds of modules and so forth. Then what we did at Cloud Posse was we created a reference architecture that we call RefArch internally, the Cloud Posse reference architecture, and that is our kind of best practices, golden path implementation for using Terraform on AWS with all of our modules and so forth. And to make that possible, we realized that we really needed a different way of expressing configuration. So the problem is that Terraform has moved far beyond being a configuration language to being more like a full-fledged language with loops and iterators and all that jazz. And when you have all the configuration inside the HCL code itself, it makes it really hard to reuse those. And that's the case when it comes to root modules, especially. So where does that live? Well, we did what most people did. We used var files, right? And then you call Terraform-var file and you specify dev and you Terraform var file -staging or prod or whatever, and that's how you run your Terraform. And then you can't type that, so then you put it in a makefile, and then you realize makefile stuck, and then you write bash script, and then bash becomes complicated, so you do Python, and then Python, I know, I'm just going on. And then ultimately you realize that you need a CLI that manages your environments and makes this a consistent way of doing it. So that's when we created Atmos. So I just want to, there's Cloud Posse, our modules, there's our reference architecture, which is Terraform, and then there's Atmos, and Atmos is this framework for infrastructure as code driven by a CLI called Atmos that we wrote. And you're talking about these GitHub actions that we've written. And there are GitHub actions here for different phases of when you're using Terraform. There's a plan phase, there's an apply phase, and there's just trying to know what we should plan at all. There's discovering what changed. And that's what we call affected stacks. So figuring out what changed in there. And then there's day 2 things, which is, well, what is drifting? What is no longer matching what you have in version control? So what we have described here is how to implement these GitHub actions to perform those things. We at Cloud Posse, we use our reference architecture, so it's harder for us to validate exactly that if you copy and paste this into your infrastructure, doing it your way, that this is working, because we have a convention that we follow with our reference architecture. These examples here are basically brought over from our reference architecture. And then if you go to, you might be referring to under our reference architecture, when we talk about automating Terraform, we have some examples here with workflows, example workflows. And these are the workflows that are basically the ones that we ship with our reference architecture. Everything at docs.cloudposse.com is kind of like, it's like a Ferrari dealership that gives away the manuals to all their Ferraris, but you have to buy the Ferrari for the manual to be worth anything. So everything at docs.cloudposse.com refers to our commercial reference architecture that you can buy. And these are the workflows that you would then use, or these are the Atmos workflows to set that up. But here are the example workflows for GitHub Actions that show how to run Atmos inside of a GitHub action with a job for plan and a job for describing what's affected. And that's annoying. I don't know why it's collapsing like that. All right, so now that I've established kind of the difference between Atmos tool and the GitHub Actions there, and our reference architecture and the GitHub Action workflows that we have there, can I further narrow down your question to, oh, and then Espresso is what you're talking about. So Espresso is actually a different side of this whole equation. Espresso is a way of doing CD, continuous delivery, for ECS. Like you have Helm as a way of deploying apps to Kubernetes. You have Helm file as a way of deploying Helm charts to Kubernetes. You have Argo CD and so forth. Espresso is a tool in that category. So for application deployments, we typically prescribe different workflows than the ones that you see here, because that is for deploying directly to the ECS cluster. All of that said, we are actively working on a new solution that should be ready in the next week or so. It's under the Cloud Posse Examples organization. And we're calling it App on ECS V2. And this shows you a example application with a hello world. This happens to be written in Go. So ignore the Go code. This is just to show that you can deploy an application this way. And an Atmos configuration file that lives inside of the application repository that lets you now run Atmos in your app repos to deploy to ECS, using Atmos, using Terraform, not using Espresso, and all these other hacks. And what's really cool about this example is this shows you how you can then leverage your infrastructure monorepo to retrieve things like the ECS cluster ID, the VPC IDs, the subnet IDs, and all of that, and configure the identities, for example, here that you're going to use as a developer. So these are the identities like for a dev admin, a platform admin, a production admin. And in Atmos, we've added this ability to assume roles. So now Atmos lets developers operate on the command line, and it just automatically assumes the correct role given the environment that they're working on. And I don't know if you saw our demo last week on Atmos Auth. On office hours, we did another demo on that. That would be a good one to look at. So I feel like I haven't necessarily answered your question because there's a lot there. But in terms of deploying to ECS with GitHub Actions, this is the example then that you should probably keep an eye on if you're going down that route. App on ECS v2. And this has, here's the other, remember my whole, or I don't know if you were on the call earlier, but I had a whole thing about reusable workflows and when to use them and when not to use them. So one of the conscious design efforts that we did with this repository was not using reusable workflows so they would be as easy as possible for anyone to understand. So in this example here, you can see this is the workflow on GitHub Actions that runs when a pull request is opened. First job is to build the Docker image, and that's just using here we're installing Atmos so that we can have Atmos obtain the credentials for GitHub OIDC access to AWS dynamically. And then we're logging into ECR, and then we're building the Docker image. And then the next job is to deploy. So then here we're installing Atmos again, and then just running one command to easily deploy a preview environment to ECS using Atmos, using Terraform in a simple workflow. So all of this is self-contained here. This would probably be the easiest place to get started rather than looking at the methods we have been doing with Espresso to deploy to ECS and trying to make things work across multiple repositories that each need to manage state was very difficult, and that's what we wanted to avoid. So this makes it so much easier to use ECS.
For that though, like we do have like a shared private org GitHub action repo, and then everybody basically just pointed at that and it calls whatever we have like main. But it has to commit to the main GitOps repo, right? So like how are you? I saw that Espresso had that little like GitHub action only this repo can deploy or something like that in the YAML.
Well, so historically, like when we started with this, like in 2019 or 2018, I forget exactly, we did our first ECS engagement, and we were inspired by Argo CD, and we thought, dude, we're just going to do exactly what Argo CD does. We're going to have this desired state repository. We're just going to commit dynamically files into this deployment repository, and then those will roll out. But dynamic commits and CI proved to not work in a dynamic or team environment because we would just get constant merge conflicts. Because what are you doing most of the time? 3 PRs are all modifying exactly the same line. It's always the image tag line, right? So then you're spending all this time rebasing or fixing merge conflicts, and the magic of having a deployment repository went away for us. So we're going more for this other model where the application repo now owns its applications, and all the state for that application is managed within that application repository. So that application repository deploys its own ECS task to the ECS cluster. It uses its own Terraform state backend. It's not sharing the state backend for like the core infrastructure. We deploy a separate backend for applications, and all those applications in that account share that backend to deploy. This is so that we don't have to play that song and dance where some of the infrastructure is over here and needs to be updated. Some of the infrastructure is over here and needs to be updated. We need to get them in sync and talking to each other. And that just was very complicated for most people to understand. We solved it. We had that working, but I say we still failed because it was still complicated, because it is complicated, not because our solution was wrong. So we're just simplifying this by moving, hey, app, you deploy your tasks, you deploy the task definition, you deploy the container definition, all of that lives in your application repository, and that gives developers the ability to control all of that. If you want to dry it up, you can still do that. You can use Atmos vendoring to vendor in the ECS component from some central place, or you can use a shared ECS module. But ECS is a beast to manage in a open source way, because there's too many ways people want to use it. So the best thing we recommend for you, if you're doing ECS, is you create your opinionated ECS component or modules for your organization for how you want to deploy to ECS, and then you will be successful. We just had to optimize for different problems.
Yeah, but so I guess at that point you don't have it in the core infra repo, right? The applications anymore. So the visibility would be going back to each repo.
Yeah. Well,
or Atmos commands, I guess. Atmos command.
Well, It is a trade-off. So it's basically what you optimize for. So one option is you can have it all in the centralized infrastructure repository, which we were big proponents for, and what we tried to do, basically a registry of everything in one place. But then you had this problem where just deploying an app was a real convoluted process. So if in the end what we want to optimize for is the last mile software delivery piece, having to shove everything through a centralized monorepo just to do that deployment felt overly dogmatic, if that makes sense. Like we were being overly strict on a principle that wasn't serving us in the end. So the principle was, we strongly believe there should be a centralized monorepo for the infrastructure. Everything should go in there. Then we have the centralized record. But if that comes at the cost of actually being able to move faster, then we should revisit that consideration. All of that said, I think it's still possible, but I would, question for another office hours would be how, once we have this new pattern released and involved, how could we satisfy both paradigms? The paradigm where ECS tasks and task definitions live in the infrastructure monorepo and apps are deployed externally. And then what we're optimizing for right now. So all right. Any other questions? We're at the final 3 minutes here. Any quick questions we can get to today? Let me check the Zoom chat. There was one thing posted there. Time reminder. Yep. All right. Well, thanks everyone for your time then. I'm gonna do my little outro here. If you are new to office hours, and that is, where did that link go? Here we are. If you're new to office hours, don't forget to register at cloudposse.com/office hours, where you can register for our live weekly Zoom calls to ask these questions. We post all of our recordings to youtube.com/cloudposse. Today's recording will be posted there in just a few hours. We have a Slack community where you can join and ask questions, participate with all the members of our open source community, collaborate on solutions. If one great way or reason to join our Slack community is if you are using our open source, you open a pull request and you want it reviewed, expedited, go into our Slack community, go into the PR reviews channel, and that's where you can ask for a review. We get just so many pull requests. We don't really, we can't stay on top of all of them. So we really prioritize users in our Slack community. And then there's our newsletter you can register for. Just drop in your email and you'll get that in your inbox. If you would like some more support from Cloud Posse, we have a lot of support options to fit your size and budget and your needs. Just go to cloudposse.com/support and you'll see how we're able to accelerate adoption of our open source in your organization. That includes our GitHub Actions, that includes Atmos, that includes our Terraform modules. All of that is covered by support. All right, everyone. Thanks for your time today, and we'll see you next week.